Hey man, the deeper you understand women, the more difficult it becomes to love them. Not because knowledge makes you bitter, but because it removes illusion. Love, at least the version most men grow up believing in, depends heavily on fantasy. The belief that effort is always rewarded, that loyalty guarantees loyalty in return, that honesty creates safety. Understanding women slowly dismantles those beliefs. You stop seeing promises and start seeing patterns. You notice tendencies instead of intentions, emotional laws instead of emotional stories. And once those patterns become clear, loving with innocence becomes almost impossible. At first, understanding feels powerful. You learn about attraction, polarity, emotional cycles, testing behavior, attachment styles. Suddenly, things make sense. You finally understand why effort didn't always work, why love wasn't enough, why consistency sometimes led to boredom instead of appreciation. But clarity is followed by grief, because you begin to realize how little of it was ever personal. Her shifts weren't about you. Her contradictions weren't moral failures. They were emotional mechanics. And once you see that, romance quietly loses its magic. The more you understand women, the more clearly you see how emotion, not logic, not principle, drives behavior. And love becomes harder because love requires trust, and trust depends on predictability. When you realize feelings can override words, history, promises, and even character in certain moments, you stop resting easily. You stop assuming stability. You start loving carefully, knowing that what feels solid today can dissolve tomorrow without malice, without planning, without guilt. Understanding also exposes how conditional affection often is, not consciously conditional, but emotionally so. Love lasts while the feeling lasts. Desire exists while polarity exists. Respect remains while the man holds frame. And once you see this, unconditional love starts to feel naive. Much of what's called love is really alignment with an emotional state. When alignment shifts, love reshapes or disappears. That knowledge makes loving freely. The hardest realization is that women don't usually choose these shifts. They experience them. They don't wake up planning to pull away. Something changes internally and the explanation comes afterward. Understanding this removes blame, but it also removes comfort. If behavior is driven by internal feeling, states even they don't fully control, love becomes less of a bond and more like weather. And weather can't be trusted, only anticipated. As understanding deepens, you notice how often the past is rewritten to match the present. Memories are reshaped to justify current emotions. Narratives shift when desire fades. This isn't calculated manipulation, it's emotional coherence. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. History stops feeling like a reliable anchor. Commitment feels fragile when the past itself can change meaning. You also learn that attraction isn't moral. It doesn't reward goodness, patience, or sacrifice by default. It responds to strength, direction, detachment, and emotional steadiness. This hits men hard because it contradicts what they were taught. Being a good man doesn't guarantee being a desired one, and realizing that forces you to separate romance from reality. The more you understand, the less you idealize. And idealization is what fuels effortless love. When idealization dies, love becomes conscious, measured, guarded. You watch behavior instead of believing words. You prepare for shifts. This wisdom makes love heavier. You're no longer falling, you're choosing, and choice carries responsibility. There's also a quiet loneliness that comes with understanding. To love women effectively, you must stay emotionally disciplined. You can't fully abandon yourself to feeling. You remain grounded, restrained, controlled. That protects you, but it also distances you from the reckless intimacy you once craved. Innocence doesn't return once awareness sets in. So the more you understand women, the harder it becomes to love them freely. Not because they're unlovable, but because love without illusion becomes something else entirely. Less intoxicating, more grounded. And every man who reaches this stage must choose between fantasy that feels good but breaks him, or truth that protects him but costs sweetness. As understanding matures, love stops feeling like surrender and starts feeling like management. You regulate reactions, pace affection, measure investment, not for control, but because you know what happens when you give too freely. You've seen devotion collapse polarity. You've lived moments where love became leverage. And once you learn that, loving blindly feels irresponsible. You also realize how often emotional truth outruns moral intention. A woman can mean everything she says today and invalidate it tomorrow without seeing herself as dishonest. Understanding removes the villain narrative, but also certainty. Consistency isn't guaranteed by character alone. It's sustained by conditions. And conditional love requires vigilance, not relaxation. The more you understand, the more you separate empathy from expectation. You can understand her emotions without expecting loyalty to override feeling. This realism protects you, but it hardens you slightly. You stop dreaming in absolutes. You think in seasons, knowing seasons end. You also see how much love is influenced by environment, mood, validation, comparison, stress, attention. Attraction becomes porous. Once you see that, you stop treating it as sacred. You respect it, but you don't worship it. Eventually, you realize many exits aren't about lack of love. They're about intolerance for discomfort. Understanding this makes you value resilience over romance. You stop relying on affection as a guarantee. As awareness deepens, detachment becomes necessary. Not cold detachment, but anchored detachment. The kind that allows closeness without collapse, depth without danger, structure without suffocation, love without self-destruction. You begin to understand why many men feel disillusioned, not angry. Disillusionment is awakening. You don't hate women, you respect reality, and respect changes behavior. You become selective, slow, intentional. Love becomes clearer, but less intoxicating. Reckless love feels better early. Wise love lasts longer, but feels heavier. Every man must decide which cost he's willing to pay. Eventually, you stop romanticizing sacrifice. You realize suffering doesn't create security. You stop equating pain with virtue. Love becomes quieter, but more honest. At this stage, love is no longer something you disappear into. It's something you visit while remaining intact. You stay open without being unguarded. You enjoy intimacy without surrendering identity. Understanding women changes how you listen. You trust behavior over words, pace over promises, follow through over explanation. This clarity removes fantasy, but saves dignity. Love stops being salvation. It becomes addition, and additions are optional. That optionality changes everything. Detachment isn't the opposite of love. It's what allows love to exist without fear. Dependency turns love into anxiety. Understanding teaches you how fear corrodes attraction. So yes, the more you understand women, the harder it becomes to love them blindly, but the easier it becomes to love them consciously. Blind love feels warm. Conscious love feels heavy, but conscious love doesn't destroy you. And at some point, solitude begins to feel honest. Not because you hate women, but because peace no longer feels negotiable. Love stops being a necessity and becomes a question. Is this worth the cost? Your standards sharpen, not as checklists, but energetically. You ask whether someone adds clarity or noise. You stop forcing compatibility. Love becomes selective by default. You realize much of what men call love was actually hope. Hope dissolves, not into despair, but realism. Fantasy fades. Stability grows. You slow emotionally, not from numbness, but regulation. Wisdom lives in that space. It's quiet. It doesn't intoxicate. Expectation, not betrayal, is what breaks most men. Loving without guarantees requires strength. Most men were never trained for that. At this level, love becomes a conscious act, not an emotional accident. You don't fall anymore. You step deliberately. It's less euphoric, but it doesn't break you. There is grief here, the loss of naive love. But mourning illusion is necessary for maturity. Eventually, love stops being about surrender. It becomes alignment. Behavior over promises, consistency over intensity. Sustainable love doesn't burn bright. It burns steady. So yes, the more you understand women, the harder it becomes to love recklessly. But the easier it becomes to love without losing yourself. You don't love less. You love cleaner.